Welcome back to my channel, guys. Today we're going to be making this beautiful long dress. I'm not calibrate for this, so I'm going to mark under bust, and my under bust is 14 inches. And after that, I'm going to rule a line across it. This is our under bust line. I'm just going to label it. So this is our shoulder depth. I'm just going to measure it. So after measuring it, I'll divide it by 2. I've got 3 inches here. I'm going to divide it by 2 and increase my shoulder depth. This means that I'm increasing my shoulder depth by 50%. The reason for this is to create enough space for the bust to sit properly. The next thing I'm going to do is to use my pattern master to connect that point to create a curvy end. This will give us a bustier line. So I'm going to come in by half an inch on my waistline, and that will be my new center front. And then I'll slant the line upward. On the bust line, I'm going to come down by half an inch. I'm going to do that in front and on the back. And using my pattern master, I'm going to be creating a new armhole line. Shoulder line, I came down by 3.8 inches. This is optional, so I did this and used my ruler to connect the points. So I made sure that the both lines are most likely going to join when I'm sewing. So you need to do this properly before drawing your lines. So I figured the line that will work very well for me. Now I'm just going to draw it now. First line, I'm going to come down by like half an inch. That will be the depth of my neckline. I'm just going to use a marker to highlight my neckline and as well as the other lines that have been drawn. I'll use my pattern master to carve out the design that I want on the pattern. So I'll extend lines and voila, this is the design I've been wanting to make. On my zip end, I'm just going to be marking out the zip allowance. I'm using 3/4. You can use 1 inch or 1/4. This depends on how much allowance you want to have on your zip. After that, I'm going to use my ruler to connect the points together to create my zip allowance. Cutting out the bodies that I'll be needing for the style that we're creating. So after cutting the waist end, I'm trashing the bottom end of the pattern paper because it's not going to be useful. Now I'm going to extend the dart point on my ruler. I'll draw a straight line to connecting the two darts together, and I'll label it as my back, and this is my front as well. So now I'm going to be cutting out the excess of that. So the parts that we no longer need, I'm going to be cutting them out. Now I'm going to label the center front line and the side front so I don't get confused along the line. The lower end of my pattern paper as center front and side front. This is to avoid any confusion. I'm just going to cut through my back line. That's where my back would be starting. And I will cut out the excess that I will be needing. I'm going to label this as side back, center back, and I'm going to do my zip allowance as well. So this is going to be my pattern pieces for the front and the back from top to waistband. So next thing, I'm drafting out my skirt pattern. This is something I've done before on my YouTube channel, so in case you don't know how to draft a skirt pattern, you can go back to watch it. I've posted it before, so be happy to go and watch it so you understand what I'm doing at this point. What I've done is that mark out my waist, my hip point and my midpoint. So I'm going to be dividing my waist by 4 and adding 1 inch allowance. Next, I'm using my pattern master to connect the cubby end. So from my waist to hip and then from my hip to my new point, I'm going to connect this point. To actually understand this, I've taught this skirt pattern in detail, so please make sure you go back to watch it if you don't understand what I'm doing. I'm just briefly going to teach it because that is not what we're after today. We're after making a dress. I'm just going to create my dart points and mark it, and then I'll use my ruler to connect that point. So it's ½ inch on both sides, and the length of my dart is 5 inches. So I'll use my ruler to create my darts. I'm just going to be cutting out my pattern pieces. So I'll cut out the excess paper and then I would use it to draft out my back pattern. First thing I'm going to do is to be marking out zip allowance on the paper I'm using to draft my back pattern. So I'm using 1 inch for my zip allowance, and then I'll use my ruler to create a straight line that would serve as my zip allowance. The next thing I'm going to do is to place my front pattern on my back pattern. So I'm going to be tracing out my hip line, my waistline, and the knee point as well. So again, make sure that the pattern is the same length with the front, so you don't have a longer back or a shorter back. On the waist, I'm going to come in by ½ inch. So I'll slant that point to my hip point. And then on my knee point, I'm also going to come in by ½ inch. Do the same on the length of my skirt. Now I'm going to use my ruler to connect those points together. So I'm going to connect my hip to my knee point, and then I'll connect my knee point straight to the length of the skirt. The reason for this is just for our bum to sit properly on the skirt. I'm going to use this item to transfer our front dart to our back dart. So this is going to be used to trace the dart, which is what I'm doing now. If you don't have this, just mark the exact dart you have on your front part and just transfer it to your back skirt pattern. I'm just going to cut out the excess paper from our back pattern. So after cutting this out, that would be the end of our pattern drafting for the skirts. This is going to be our zip allowance right here. I'm just going to mark out the dart that has been transferred from the front. So I'm just going to use my ruler to create the darts. As you can see, I've placed my pattern on my fabric. So now I'm just going to be creating the allowance that is needed. So I've added 1 inch sewing allowance on the length of my skirt. So I'm going to rule it out and then cut. So the sewing allowances are not fixed. So it depends on how much sewing allowance you like to use. So by the size, I've added about 1 inch as well. So you can do more than that or less than that. Just do what works for you. To cut out my lining, I'm going to fold in that sewing allowance I added on the length, that 1 inch sewing allowance. I'm just going to fold it in. As you see, I've folded it in. This is because I'll use my lining to fold in, meaning that the lining will be shorter than the fabric itself, so that by the time you're done, you would have a bit of the fabric inside. So I'll show you after we're done sewing. So for now, let's iron the lining and cut out. I've cut out my skirts, and now I'm going to be cutting out my upper bodice. I'm going to cut it out. I'll also do the same for the lining, and then so we can start sewing. So these are going to be our pattern pieces. I'll take you over to the ironing board to add our interface, which is also known as tape. So now I'm done that, and I'm just going to stitch these pieces together. So now I've stitched this bust together. See how curvy bust is. So I'm going to stitch this together as well to continue. Going to stitch together my lining, so I'll do everything I do for the fabric, I do exactly the same on the lining, so this makes work faster and easier. So now I'm going to top stitch this end. I'll do it on both sides. I'm using lace to cover up the fabric I've just sewn, so I'll put this lace on top of it. Now I'm going to just stitch it together. So I've stitched up my lace. Now I'm just going to take it to my ironing board, place it on my lining, pin it down, then stitch it up again. This is what has been achieved so far. So I'm going to take this to the machine and stitch it together. Here is the outcome. So this is what we've got for now. Now I'm just going to be adding the lining, and I'll place the lining on top of this and sew the sides together as well as the neckline, but I'll leave the strap end. I'll leave it, and then I'll sew the neckline and the sides. I'll pin it to hold it down, and then I'll take it to the sewing machine to sew round it. Remember, you're sewing the neckline and the sides and leaving the strap end. I have joined the back pieces together. So next I'm just going to get my lining and place it on top. I'll do that for the other side, place my lining and then take it to the machine and sew. I've done that now, so now it's time to add straps. So now I'm going to be cutting out my strap. I'm using 2 inches for the width of my strap. So the length of your strap will determine on your measurement. For mine, I have measured it out and I'm using 2 inches as the width, as you can see. So this is my strap. I separate it down as a 2 now. So I'll just take it to the machine, fold it and sew. Here is the finished look of my strap. So looking at it, you can see how neatly sewn it is. I'll take it back to the machine to sew it together with my back pieces. So I'm going to be joining it together like I'm doing now on the sewing machine, and then I'll be adding my strap to it as well. So there you see it. I'm going to take it back to sew together. I've joined my straps to my bodies, and also if you see, I've joined it to my bodies, and I've got my zip here, and my skirt as well have been joined. So all I'm going to be doing is to basically put the skirt and the bodies together and sew it, and that will give us our dress. So there is the skirt. I've sewn it, neatly done, all stitched, and then I'll use my zip. So if you see, if I place the bodies and the skirt is exactly the same match, so all I'm doing is to just join them together and add my zip, and then you get to see the finished work of the whole thing. So guys, this is the finished look of our simple and classic dress. I hope you enjoyed the process of making this beautiful dress. If you really enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share and comment. Thank you guys for watching. See you on my next video. Bye.